beyond belief.
Michael Rizza. I teach creative writing and American literature here. So I, the honor of being moderator. So I know everybody's probably been introduced multiple times today, but some people may be new in the audience, so I'm going to read some bios for our panel. So Ian Tregillis is the author of 7 critically acclaimed novels, including The Milkweed Triptych, Bitter Seeds, The Coldest War, and Necessary Evil, Something More Than Night, and the Alchemy Wars trilogy, Mechanical, The Rising, and The Liberation. His novels have been translated into 9 languages and have routinely appeared on the best of the year's list. His short fiction has been reprinted in over half a dozen years' best collections, including Best Science Fiction and Fantasy of the Year, Best New Horror, the year's top hard science fiction stories, and the year's best science fiction and fantasy. He is a writer, a scientist, and a thoroughly disappointing flesh monger. That's from his website. I'll leave someone in the audience to ask what that means. Rebecca Roanhorse is the New York Times bestselling and Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Award-winning speculative fiction writer, and the recipient of the 2018 Astounding Award for Best New Writer. Rebecca has published multiple award-winning short stories and 6 novels, including 2 in the 6 World Series, Star Wars Resistance Reborn, Race to the Sun for the Rick Riordan imprint, and 2 in the epic fantasy Between Earth and Sky trilogy, Black Sun and Fevered Star. The final novel in the trilogy is set to be released in 2024. She has also written for Marvel Comics and for television and had projects optioned for Amazon Studios, Netflix, and AMC Studios. She lives in northern New Mexico with her husband, daughter, and pup. She drinks a lot of black coffee. Vivian Shaw wears too many earrings and likes edged weapons and expensive ink.
We're doing this bio.
Curious what expensive ink means. Is that like tattoos?
Fountain pen ink.
Actually pens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Trust me on the expensive.
She was born in Kenya and has lived in Cardiff, Oxford, and Baltimore. She has a BA in art history, an MFA in creative writing and publishing arts, and currently works as a professional freelance editor and proofreader. She writes about monsters, both in and out of classic horror literature, machines, extant and fantastical, disasters and their causes, and found family. She is the author of the Dr. Greta Helsling contemporary fantasy trilogy, A Strange Practice, Dreadful Company, and Grave Importance. She reviews for the Washington Post, and her short sci-fi horror fiction has appeared in Uncanny and Pseudopod. She says she reads terrible vampire novels, so you don't have to. In her spare time, she collects terrible vintage cookbooks and very nice fountain pens. Right? Writes fan fiction under the pen name of Colto. She lives in Santa Fe with her wife and Hugo Locus Award-winning author Katie Martine. And then, last panelist is Emily Mah. She writes as Emily Mah for science fiction and fantasy, Ian Tippett for contemporary fiction, and with her son as D.Z. Mah for children's books.
That's awesome.
Her short stories have appeared in Analog, Science Fiction and Fact, The Black Gate, and anthologies like Dragon and Stars, Shanghai Steam, and Change, the Tales of Downfall and Rebirth. Her Ian Tippett novels have been on the Amazon Top 100 numerous times, and her novel, Someone Else's Fairy Tale, was the semi-finalist for the Best Indie Book of the Year, Kindle Book Review, and a runner-up for the Romance for the Best Independent Book Award Festival Awards. She is a graduate of the Clarion West Writers Workshop for Science Fiction and Fantasy, and Viable Paradise Writers Workshop. And just often teaches the unit on self-publishing at the Taos Toolbox Writers Workshop.
That is really
When not writing or chasing small children,
really
she manages Ian Tippett's book designs, her company which offers formatting, cover design, and editing services to authors and publishers. All right, well, thanks, everybody. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is maybe our topic is the craft and routine of writing. So I thought maybe I'd just start very broad and general, see if you want to give an overview on the topic about how you approach it, like the craft and routine of writing, your practices. So we could start with Rebecca first.
The craft, I mean, that is very broad.
That is very broad. Maybe if you want to just start with the routine, you know?
Oh, okay, so my routine writing, do I have one? Every novel is different. Every project is different. There was a novel, I wrote my children's novel. I can only write it during the day. Some of my adult stuff, I can only write at night. Certainly my routine has changed from when I was working full-time. I used to be a lawyer in my day job, and I would come home and write from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Sitting at my daughter's bedside. Now I'm a full-time writer, and I get up and I write. I drop my daughter off at school. Now she's in driver's ed as we speak. So things have changed. And so I will go to a coffee shop and I will write, and usually till lunchtime. I'll take a break, have lunch. I'm brain dead until about 5 o'clock. If I try to write during those times, it's like pulling teeth. Like, it's just awful. Like, no, don't do it. And then I'll write again at night. And so usually I write every day, although there are some days where I don't write at all.
I am coming out of a long fallow period where I had stopped writing for a while because I gotten very burned out. So part of the reason for that burnout was because I had been sort of psychotically disciplined in terms of routine, making sure I wrote every day, that I wrote that I hit a quota every single day, no matter what, rain or shine, and that was coming on top of, I don't write full time. I have a day job that takes me out of the house 12 to 13 hours a day. That includes 2 to 3 hours of commuting every day. And so I had to be extremely, extremely dedicated. More when I was writing to deadlines and contracts. So I got extremely burned out. So now my routine, as I come back to it, is a little different. I don't force myself to write every day. Now, if I have a deadline, that may change. But what I try to do is something writing focused every day. And I give myself permission to not produce new words every day if I'm genuinely editing. Not like, oh, I'm laying on the couch, but I'm plotting a book. Like, that's writing. Like, it really, if I'm doing something that I know, because any writer will tell you that writing, like the typing is only part of the job. But I still try to make good use of my time. So now in my 3 hours of commuting every day, 2 hours of which are spent on a bus, I have a little folding Bluetooth keyboard that pairs to my phone, because none of my electronics can come with me when I get to work. So they're small enough they can fit in a locker. But I put my backpack on my lap and I unfold my little keyboard and I put my iPhone on it and I can write. I mean, I've written entire novellas this way. So I try to use my time very efficiently, I would say.
That's impressive. When I have a deadline, which I currently do, and it's so far off at this point that it is not exactly in the guilt stage of self-motivation yet, but it'll get there. I have to figure out how long I have to write X number of words, and then I can set a reasonable expectation for a certain number of words a day or a certain number of words a week or whatever. And if I don't hit that, or if I go beyond it, that's fine, but a ballpark is necessary, because otherwise I don't know where I am in the process. But my process, such as it is enormously regimented in some ways, and a lot of authors don't necessarily follow this at all. Some of them do something similar, but they use a program called Scrivener to do it. But I constantly have a running sequence of scenes down the left side of my screen in either Google Docs or Word, and each of those are a hot link to that part in the script, and that tells me where I am, what has happened, and if I need to go back to another scene, I just have to scroll up and click it, and there I am. So I don't have to scroll up and down 90 pages. And I also get so kind of inside my own head with research and writing things that I may not necessarily remember where I've put people at any given time. So I have a running spreadsheet of the day and the character. Like character, day. And that tells me where each of them are at any given time. This sounds so unbelievably anal. And I'm not the normal, like the kind of person who like draws out like schedules and colors each individual thing in a slightly different color of green. But this has worked for me, and it's stopped me from screwing up, and it's also kept me on track and not had to realize that I was on track for about a 20,000 word novella when I was scheduled to finish a 90,000 word novel. That was bad. I have now figured out this method to avoid being in that position.
So I've been doing this for a while. Not to overshare, but to be candid, I'm from a background where there was not a whole lot of support for my writing career. That was not what my Chinese father side of the family wanted for me, and so there's a lot of deals that you make. I got into Clarion West in my third year of law school, and since I'd done law school, that was my graduation present, was getting to go to Clarion West.
Yeah.
So I've always written in scraps of time. When I was married, there was not a ton of support for me writing during that time. My marriage broke up last year. So I think the moral of my story is that you may not have the kind of life where routines are going to happen for you. And you just got to figure out how to make that work. And you've got to figure out how to cut deals. And sometimes you're cutting those deals on a day-to-day basis. Your two toddlers are running around crazy, and you get 10 minutes when they're both asleep, and you write what you can.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is you work with what you've got. Because my life has been so chaotic in so many ways, I've done a lot of different careers. I've been an attorney, I run a formatting business, I was an admin for a financial advisory firm, I'm a realtor, I'm now in the compliance department of a financial advisory firm. I'm not really sure what that job entails. I started on Monday. Apparently I'm really qualified for it, so I'll do that for a while. And you take the bits and pieces of what you can pull together in your life, and that's where the magic happens creatively. That's where you pull together to be able to write the stories that nobody else is going to write, because your life has been so different than what other people have experienced. You get good at plotting tightly because you don't have time.
Yep.
You don't have time for being able to go on and on. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't need a routine in order to have a successful career.
Mm-hmm.
You find the tools that work for you.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're going to change.
Yeah, they do.
And you'll find a set that
Everything
works, and then they'll break. Yeah.
So, my next question is like, a lot of times when people write, they get false starts, or they start and they stop. Like, how do you know when it's right and you got to keep going, and how do you know when to abandon a project? Like, do you begin with a sense of voice? Do you begin with a premise? Do you begin with a plot? Do you begin with a moment that you want to write to? Or like, how do you know when it's like you've got it? Like you have. A lot of people have to rely on voice. If they don't get the voice, they know they don't got it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say if they don't got the plot worked out, they don't got it, and they abandon it. So I was just curious about that generative moment.
Oh gosh, I think again every project is different. I write IP, so in a case like that, IP means like intellectual property, like Star Wars or Marvel. So I'm not always writing my own story. I've been told generally what I need to write, and then I have to meet the command, whatever. So there's that. For my own stuff, I do outline.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea has to hold together through an outline. If I can only get, the first, of course the beginning is usually the easy part, right? Your first few chapters, it's exciting, it's new, especially if you can hit voice, like that's very cool. Much harder to find an ending to any story. And then, the middle could just be the like cesspool of crap. So you really have to avoid that. So if you can, I mean, for me at least, I need to be able to outline the entire novel. I don't have to, like 80%. Like I don't have to know exactly how it ends, and I don't have to stick to it. It's not like I can't sort of like go my own separate way once I get started. But it has to be an idea that holds water. Short stories are a little more nebulous. I might start a short story just on voice alone. Just kind of, yeah, this is working. And then you get 2,000 words in and you're all, this wouldn't work at all, you know? And so often I will set that aside. And if it's been solicited, which means like someone asked me to write it, so I kind of have to go back to it because I agreed to write this, then I will go back and try to like, you know, work my way through it. But often there will be a number of iterations before I get it right. So just because I wrote it one time this way doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. I might have to scrap it, change voice, change point of view, kind of keep fiddling with it until it hits. And I don't know how you know that it hits, except that like it feels right.
Yeah.
I have to know the kind of riffing on that. I always have to know the beginning and the end before I start. And when I work on like a novel, I tend to think in acts.
Yeah.
So I need to know the beginning and end of the story, the beginning and end of each, how that breaks into acts, and then the beginning and end of those, and then maybe how those break into chapters, and how those begin and end. Which sounds super regimented, but outlines are very fluid.
Yeah.
And I attack trilogies the same way. But that's sort of necessary but not sufficient requirement. Often it is for me voice, but like Rebecca said, you know, every project is different. Often it's sort of, I think the magic moment for me is when I figure out the interface between the structure and the plot and the storytelling, like the voice and the plot and how the story is being told. When I get that, that's usually when it gels for me.
For short fiction, it's almost always, it starts with an idea, like what if? And once I have the what if, then I sort of just jump in with both feet, which is interesting because I never used to write short fiction at all until like, I think it was 2018 I got published for the first time in Uncanny. And since then I was like, oh, I can do this now. I've never been able to do this before, but suddenly I can do this. Cool. So I've written a bunch of stories, only a few of which have ever seen the light of day, because they don't always work, or I realize like halfway through the amount of research I need to do to make this work is just untenable, and I don't know where to get the information. So that one just sort of sits on a shelf until I can figure out something to do with it. And then there are some that I've like redone year after year after year, and I cannot make it sit. Like the end just does not work. And for novels, I don't know, it's weird because like for the past several years I've worked only in this Greta Helsing universe, which means that I know all of the characters, I know the world, I don't have to come up with a new anything. I just have to like create the plot and like make them do the things. But yeah, I have to outline, and outlines are both regimented and fluid for me. Like I do it sort of scene by scene. I do like an overarching outline, like this is how it starts, this is what happens basically. How we get from here to there may change. But as I go through, each individual chapter has, in square brackets, in all caps, person does thing, then person does other thing happens. And as I write these individual bits, I erase the all caps brackets, and it just sort of like propagates as I go down.
I mean, I think there's a lot of romance in just how writing is, or how bestsellers are created, the stories that are told by to the public of this idea of it being some sort of magical, mystical process. And there is an element of that, but I think if we're going down the table is you always need to be working on your technical expertise.
Yep.
Even people who are hardcore pantsers, you know, Jeffy Kennedy does not know how her books are going to end when they begin.
That's terrible.
But if you hear her talk about her process, it is deeply technical. She knows that, oh, if I haven't set up the stakes and, you know, and all of these things by this number of words, then I'm writing a much longer novel than I thought. And yes, it needs to speak to you. Yes, you know, if you can't be motivated to write it, then don't expect people to be motivated to read it. That being said, not every moment is going to be this, like, caught up in wild abandon and being carried along with the currents of creativity. I mean, there's what people refer to as the Kansas-Nebraska chapters that you just need to write. You can make them more interesting later, but you just got to get through them in order to be able to, or just, when you're not entirely sure how to get these elements to come together. Sometimes you're going to have to do a few iterations, and that's not fun. I mean, it's work. The best jobs, the idea that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life has always been a lie.
Total.
It doesn't feel like you worked in hindsight. But in the moment,
Oh, you work.
you're working.
You work.
Yeah, you're working. I mean, there is no life in which you are just getting paid for playing and having fun.
No, as soon as you start
enjoy-
getting paid, then it stops being, then it becomes work, and that doesn't mean that it's not fun necessarily, but it means that it is work as
Yeah.
opposed to something you're doing for the hell of it.
For the passion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy having written.
Yes,
I don't
that's
enjoy
a common
writing.
thing. Yes, love
Sometimes
having
I
written
do.
books. That's awesome.
Sometimes I do, like, the whole, like, the screen opens up and you fall through, and, like, 3 hours later you come back and you've written many thousands of words, and you're like, whoa, that was hyper-focused.
But that's
That
fun
doesn't
until
always
you go-
happen.
And that's fun until you go back and read it, and you're like, wow, I used the same word like 5 times in one
That-
sentence.
yeah,
and
there's
you're just
that.
like, I need to calm down and have less caffeine in my system when I do this.
Sometimes it works, but you can't force it. You can
Yeah.
never force it.
It's
Otherwise,
true.
it's like pulling one tooth after another tooth,
Yeah.
and you're like, I hate this.
To go off what everybody has been saying, we've been mentioning outlines, and Emily mentioned stakes. What are the component features that you think, for that outline? Like, where do the stakes have to occur? I mean, do you have like the sense where like I want a false reversal here, a false climax here, I want the stakes here, I want when you outline, do you think in terms of those plot movements?
Well, Ian mentioned a 3-act structure. I follow
Yeah.
a 3-act structure. It's
Yeah,
not
what-
that, like, yeah.
What is the 3-act structure?
Just, I don't know, like inciting incident. Like you start, you have an incident, you have rising tension, you have a climax, and then you have like a denouement.
Yeah, you have a midpoint. Your second act tends. So some people argue it's a 4-act structure, but the midpoint tends to be. It is kind of the pivot point of the whole novel, but it's not necessarily a very remarkable moment. It's like, in Good Will Hunting, it's just when Robin Williams starts talking about meeting his wife, and that's the pivot point for the movie when you learn what is really going to matter at the end of the movie. But in the moment, it's not like, oh, this is an epiphanal.
And there are all kinds of different structures. There's all different ways to like write a novel. Like, that's part of craft, right? You need to go and like study craft. No, I don't think anyone sits down and goes, oh, I'm just a brilliant writer. It's kind of what you were saying. It's work, and like things go into this. That's why you teach a class on it, right? So you need to learn how to structure a novel. And in 3-act is one. I think that's the most common one in like Western writing. But like there's 5-act structure. Like I know a lot of K-dramas do this wonderful 4th act reversal thing where you're like, what the hell just happened? It's a great way to tell a story. So I think you decide on that. I wouldn't pants my structure. I would figure out how I'm going to structure my novel. Yeah, and then go from there.
Yeah, I don't think about individual elements of, here I'm going to have a reversal. I ask myself, but I also obviously worked with 3-act structure. In fact, I like to use the OG Star Wars trilogy as my template, even in a single book. So you introduce a world, and then you Empire Strikes Back, where you screw up that world and you kick the heroes in the nuts, and then somehow someone survives at the end. But then once I have kind of the world and the people, there's a magical moment again where you have enough of it where you can ask, okay, who would have the most interesting problem that they can actually attempt to fix? And it's great if their attempted fix doesn't work, or it makes things worse, or they make bad choices, because humans make bad choices all the time, so that you get the unintended consequences. Well, that's just speaking from my own experience. So it's the sort of unintended consequences of people making very human decisions, which are not necessarily the best decisions for like an efficient plot, to get them where they need to go. Once you have enough of those kind of dominoes hitting each other, then you end up with, you automatically get a reversal. You automatically get a betrayal. You automatically get someone who's working against someone else. It just happens organically. It's magic.
It's like the what if occurs throughout, and not just at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like my characters, this is my personality of my character, this is the situation, what if, and then you
That's basically what writing is, as far as I can, or storytelling is. Like, the question, what if, which is sort of a version of this game that Stephen King writes about in the novel Misery. It's called Can You? And Can You is very simple. It's people sit in a circle. It's like a game kids play at camp. And they are given a scenario. Careless Corrigan, the hero, is in some kind of terrible peril. Like, he's in a plane and it's heading directly for the ground and he has no parachute, and you have to come up with a way for him to survive the next few minutes. And you come up with an idea and you say, and then fill in the blank, whatever happened, and then the people around the circle are like, did he? Yeah, I could believe that. And then if you were successful and everyone thought you did, it moves on to the next person in line. But that's what writing is. It's like, it's a series of can yous and what ifs. And you play it with yourself all the time, and then you play it with people who are helping you, like, work through issues with your stuff. And it, for me, I write, my structure is extremely basic. It is basically all the way chronologically. It starts and then it moves roughly in the same time as you would expect, like, actual time to pass. I will do flashbacks, I will do, like, out-of-time stunt writing, but mostly it is thing happened, that had to do with this, and this is only happening because this and this happened. But this means that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about structure, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, like, and now I'll have a reversal, or now I'll have, like, a crisis or something. That just happens organically because I'm telling the story, and the story has things that need to occur. And as I go along, I come up with ways to make those things occur, and I may not get it right the first time. But the best way that I found to unscrew something is to explain to the other person in the room why this is never going to work. Like, this is absolute crap, I will never get this to work, and I can't do this because of that. And no, I can't do that either because of this other thing. But, oh, what if I did this? And it just, for whatever reason, like, externalizing why you can't do the thing enables me to, like, figure out something I hadn't thought of until then. And I don't know, I kind of like that moment of weird synergy.
So, I don't know, you see my jokey sweatshirt. My cousin got this. I guess her friend is named Octavia, and so they did
Awesome.
their community softball league, and they called themselves Octavia's Butlers. So, my first week at Clarion West, Octavia Butler was a teacher, and the first lesson she ever taught, she said, novels are about one thing. What's your novel about? And she just went around the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of one of those lessons that has lived on in my memory, you know, and I learn new things about it as time goes on. And it was interesting. She's like, nope, yep, no. And she goes, no. Evie's a boy who's now, you know, a National Book Award finalist. She's like, yeah, I think that would work. You know, it's like, so she nailed it. I mean, she got it.
Nice.
And so it's easy to get lost in the weeds of structure, but if you don't understand the one thing that your novel is about, then structure, no amount of structure is going to save you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there's no simpler way to say what is a fairly complex process. I mean, one way you can sort of bootstrap your way into understanding what Octavia is talking about is understand the idea of a log line. Like, who is this about? What are the stakes? But it's not just a log line that she's talking about. Why are you writing the story? Why should anybody care? What is the one thing that keeps people turning the pages? What is the one thought that, from beginning to end, makes somebody recognize this as one unified story? What is the one thing? What is that everything pivots around? So that's one thing. The other thing is, we all instinctually, we've heard stories all our lives, we think in stories, we tell our own stories about, you know, why we did things and why the world works the way it does. Instinctually, there's a lot that we already understand about stories and are going to do instinctually. Becoming a writer means discovering the things that you don't understand instinctually, and then you kind of collect that as your toolbox. So another one that was always been particularly useful for me is, and this is from the creators of South Park, it said, all scenes, you know, you have your first scene, every scene after that is but or therefore. Mm-hmm. Your first scene, therefore your second scene. There should never be scene and then scene. Mm-hmm. That, you know, why you move from one scene to the next needs to be therefore, because of this, then this, or but that looked cool. but this is not going to work. That kind of helped me, and so for me that helped me with the connective tissue of scenes. For some people it's understanding reversals, understanding that the purpose of a scene is that reversal, that pivot point in the scene, and that you learn from watching movies, yeah, things like that,
Reading screenplays.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their things that they, that you got. Usually getting to professionalism is figuring out the things that you don't instinctively have.
And figuring out ways to sort of fill in the hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I'm going to just read just a little bit about what your story's about. If you're a writer and you're struggling, I wouldn't let that stop you. I often don't know what my stories are about until I'm done with them. Like, Octavia would have hated me. I'm just like, I have no idea what I'm writing. And I don't think it's that I'm working on instinct, it's that I'm letting the story lead me. I'm never writing long fiction toward a theme.
Me either.
Or toward, something like that. I'm
can't do
engaged with characters, and I'm letting them live their lives, and I'm telling a story. And then hopefully by the end, my brain would have worked through whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'll be like, oh, that's what the story's about. Oh, I get it. This is what I was trying to work through. And look, there it is. Let me just figure that out, the ending there, so that it makes sense. But if you were to ask me, even now, if someone asked me, what's Black Sun about? I'm like,
Things.
I don't know. What do you think it's about? Because often, I think for authors, this is an interaction with readers, right? We're not just like, hopefully, good writing. You're not just like spitting out your story. You can't. Like, you have a reader. So it's a dialogue. So the reader brings their life and their experiences and their understanding to a work that you've created, and then they take what they want out of it, or they understand it. So hopefully you've created something that can dialogue with readers, and that they might get something out of it. I have people say, oh, this story's about this, and I'm like, I had no idea. Look at that. That's so cool. So anyway, I don't know. Just a note on that.
I would argue that you're instinctual. Because
Yeah.
you get to the end and it's one unified story. Nobody says this is like two novels jammed together.
Right.
Nobody says this is disjointed. So you do have it on an instinctual level. And yeah, there's a ton of interpretation and a ton of dialogue.
Yeah.
But
And
that
might be
one
because-
thing, you do have that instinct.
And it might be because we're readers, where I think we all interact with story. We understand, I think, instinctually how to create story. And so if you do that, then you're following. And I think we often, as Westerners, create 3-act structure stories.
Oh yeah.
Because that's what we've learned.
I wish that I could write to theme, because I absolutely can't. Like, when my stories are about what they're about, like they're about these characters who do these things and then these other things happen. And if people want to extract a theme from that, that's great, but I didn't necessarily put one in. Like, you can sort of see after the fact that a lot of my stories have aspects of found family or like things working out in the end, even though things get really, really dark towards the end, but there is a happy ending eventually if you work for it. But I don't like set out to write a novel about that theme. I just write stories, which sometimes makes me feel like a really, I don't know, uneducated or incompetent writer because I'm not doing it sophisticatedly. This is largely because my wife is definitely a theme writer, and I sort of stand over here and go, dang.
Yeah, that's alien to me, for sure. But a great way to get, I'm kind of the same way, where I don't know what something is about until I get to the end and people tell me, or when I get to the end, I'm like, oh gosh, there's kind of this running, there's this symbol that keeps, and like a trick that I've taught myself is, there's always a point, at least for me, where I've gotten very far and I know where I need to get to, but there's just there's a bottleneck. I have to figure something out because the characters have grown into their own skins over the course of the book, and I'm not the sort of person who will just force characters to do, everything has to happen organically from what they want and what they need and where they are and what their problems are and what their concerns are and who they care about. And so something I've taught myself to do is when I hit that bottleneck, sometimes a book will have 8 or 9 bottlenecks. You go back and look at everything you've done, and you look at the sort of the symbolism and the language and imagery that you've put into it, and you can make people think that you've been writing to theme. Because you say, oh, there's this recurring image.
How about that?
I don't know why my subconscious put that in there, but how can I use that to solve this problem? And then it gets integrated into the story, and then it kind of looks like you knew what you were doing all along.
Hey, I like
Well,
that.
but like to give an example,
Cheating.
to sort of tighten up on what Octavia's message was, Kindred, she said, was about a woman transported to the antebellum South where she must learn to survive. There's a ton of theme. I mean, there's so much else in that book, but what unites it as one story is that's what it's about. This is, she is put in this situation and must do the thing.
Yep.
And I think sometimes if we can't focus down on a very simple central concept of like seriously what makes it this the story, the beginning and the end, that's where we're going to struggle. And no amount of structure, you can't take a sort of slice of life and try to jam it into structure and get a story out of it.
Nope.
And I think maybe, this idea of figuring out what your book is about after the fact, which I sort of prefer, is because writing is a process too.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, you can't, no structure is going to save you, but certainly after you've written the book, you can sort of reverse engineer your structure. You can take structure and then apply it to this like stuff that you have to tighten it down. So never is your first draft's never always that whole thing. Your first draft's kind of crap, but you're going to go 5 drafts, 6 drafts, 10 drafts of something, and slowly it's going to sort of whittle down to the story that you're trying to tell. So I think maybe never think of your words as precious. You've always heard like kill your darlings, that sort of thing. But it's sort of like, just never get so attached to one specific thing in your story or this lovely phrase I came up with or, something like that. You have to be willing to be your own editor and like cut stuff for the sake of the story so that you kind of reverse engineer out, what your story's about.
Or the way Neil Gaiman put it is the purpose of your second draft is to make people believe you knew what you were doing all along.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's very much the
Man's not
process of
wrong.
the second draft of, oh, well, if I just put that here, then that makes sense. Yeah, it's like, I knew.
And often you don't even know that needs to go there until you get here, and then you're like,
Yes.
oh, look at me fitting this in. Like, I meant to do that.
I meant to do that.
I love those moments.
Yeah.
That's where it's fun.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman also says, I think in that same list, he says, people, there are days when writing is like, chewing glass or pulling teeth, and then there are the days, for me, very rare, where it's like magical and it's very easy. But if you're doing your job right, at the end of the day, readers won't be able to tell what parts were written on the hard day and which parts were written on the easy day.
Yep.
And I cling to that.
Yeah, my second book was the one where I was happily churning along going, this is going great. Oh, crap, I'm going to run out of story in 20,000 words. So I had to go back and basically take the story as it was and slice it open like garlic bread and stick a whole other plot in there. And then spackle over the outside so it looked seamless. It did not look seamless, but it did look okay. Like it was one contiguous story, everything worked together.
If it tastes good.
Yeah.
It was.
It tastes good.
It was fine. It
was
fit.
lovely
It hit
bread.
parameters. But that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and that was when I discovered these ways to prevent myself from making that mistake again. So the second book was definitely a learning experience. It was an extremely nasty learning experience, but I will never make those particular mistakes again.
Well, and, I mean, if any of you are into filmmaking, you see your films very differently than other people see them. Completely differently. I mean, you use the same shot 3 times. That's just the same shot in reverse. All of these things, and writing to a certain extent is like that. I mean, you get old and senile enough that sometimes you read stuff, you're like, oh, this is actually pretty good, and I don't actually remember writing it. You do have moments like that, but for the most part, your twist endings are so freaking obvious because all the clues. You're never gonna have the same kind of distance that a reader has from it, and you're doing your best to engineer an experience from the back end that works the way you want from the front end.
Yeah.
So people are talking about like drafting, like multiple drafts. But how do you approach the revision? Because you're just saying like you treat it like garlic bread, right? Do you when you revise? Do you spot revise? Like I know I have to fix this chapter, or I know I have to add this ending, or I have to add a second parallel plot, or do you just put the thing in the drawer? How do you approach? Just try to start fresh. How do you approach your drafting process?
There's
do you
no
revise
rules.
as you go?
No
Do you wait
rules.
till all the way you're
No
done?
rules.
It has to do a lot with the kind of feedback that you've gotten, which is what's going to help you shape the way you revise. I'm an editor, so I spend a lot of time writing edit letters for other people, in which I give overarching structural and or a basic, like, this story works here and here it is not working because you're trying to do this and it's not quite hitting. How can we make that work? But that's like on like the 20,000 feet up stage. And then when it comes down to much more like line edits, then I don't tell the author what to do. I'm like, I think this could work better if you leaned more on this thing than that other thing. But I'm not saying, like, unless it's like, this is grammatically incorrect, which I don't really do with my edit letters. But if I have to do that, then we have bigger problems. But no, the way in which I revise has to do a lot with what I've gotten back from my editors and what problems they've seen, what problems my beta readers have seen, what problems I have seen if I've put the thing in a drawer for like a month and not looked at it. And then if I see like these are like structural problems or these are like deep down plot issues, that's when I look at the whole thing and I'm like, okay, I need to change this. Where can I change this and how can I change this? But it starts from up here and it goes granular as you get further down.
And there's different. I mean, it's almost like, you know, if you're a lot of writers compare revising to like woodworking, where you're running your hand over it. Is it smooth? Oh no, that's completely wrong. Or and there's different techniques, including taking the whole piece out and putting. And so and you know, to a certain extent, you need to do whatever it is that gets you actually making those changes. Like and that means sometimes like I need to redraft. I need to redraft the entire first chapter, and sometimes that fails. But because you force yourself to try to redraft, you're like, no, this was actually pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to go back and start tinkering with it. But you're pulling out your different tools, and you're working with wood with unexpected grains and knots and things in it, and you need to figure out how to make it look the way you want it to look, or to work with what's there to do something that's, you know, that's nevertheless going to function the way you need it to function, but is not gashed through, is not got rough spots, is not, you know.
It's not one giant splinter.
You do multiple passes through.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
So I'll write a chapter, and then the next day when I'm going to write or whatever, I'll reread what I wrote, and I might make small edits, and then go on to like the next new thing. So you're sort of building on it. But the danger, of course, is you don't want to get to like, you know, midway and be like, oh no, I need to go back and fix everything here, and then you never finish.
Yeah.
So I think that's the danger, especially with like new writers, is you get too obsessed with making the first half perfect or something, and really whittling, and it's so great, but you haven't finished. So did you really whittle the right things? You don't even know yet because you didn't finish. So I think the goal has to be to finish, and then you do your edit. And often, if I'm 3/4 of the way through and I realize, you know what, I need to change chapter 2 because like I did this, and I'll just put a pin in it, as I say, in chapter 2. I know I need to go back and fix it, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to finish.
Yes.
And then I'm going to go back and fix it.
Right.
And then you have the whole process. You have an editor who has the 20,000, 30,000 foot view or whatever, who can like then tell you the things that you missed, because you will miss things, you will not see things. And they bring a fresh perspective, and they can be like, did you think of this? And a good editor won't correct you. They'll just say, hey, did you think about this? Did you look at this? You know, what about this? And you're like, oh. And hopefully that will prompt you to fix the problem.
Yeah, I do a similar thing where I go back, I'll read what I've done, and I'll do like polishes, not to like the final polish, but I like to, you know, I'll try to pretty things up as I go along. And I keep both from external feedback and then also just from my own analysis of what I've done. I have like a macro list of these are the structural things or things, you know, big things that are not something I can fix in 10 minutes by sitting there and thinking about improving a sentence. Moving chapters around or adding a scene or figuring out how to lay information in that I didn't give the readers. So with a big project like a book, I'm pretty slow, and I will make my process even more time consuming, because I'll finish a book, I'll put it aside for a month and try not to think about it. I'll try to remove that module of my brain that's thinking, because you live inside the book the entire time you're writing it. Try to get a fresh perspective on it. It's impossible, but a month helps for me. Fresher, yeah.
Well, it's like what Stephen King says. You know, you want it to look like an alien artifact when you take it down from the shelf.
Yeah,
like,
I mean that's the
you want to be emotionally separated enough from it that you're not.
Yeah.
Then I'll print it. I have whole shelves at home of 3-ring binders of book drafts, and I'll sit down and print out the whole thing, and then I take a red pen, page by page, and I only print it one-sided because I need the back side for all of all of the big structural changes happen by hand. You know, I have to write a new scene, I have to remove a scene. They're pretty messy, but I have to like physically do it. Once I've gone through that process,
And
it's close.
That's another thing. A lot of writers will write a draft longhand or parts of it longhand. If they're struggling while typing, they'll pull out a journal. And so even just things like the mode of how you're writing can be what it takes to.
Or changing the mode, because it
Yeah,
changes
exactly.
something in your brain.
Yeah.
And often before I write something, I will write it in a notebook. I'll at least write out like, okay, what's gonna happen in this scene? I'll sort of like narrate it, like little bits of dialogue I'm thinking about, I'll put down. And then I have a version that when I go to the computer to type it out, I already have a version. And I'm not trying to think while I'm writing. Like I've done my thinking already on paper, so this is just sort of like bringing it to life. Because often if you're trying to think while you're typing, you're sitting there going, well, what goes next? Well, and you're wasting all this time like trying to figure stuff out. And for some reason, paper and a pen make my brain do something a little different than like typing on a computer.
I often find myself solving a problem that I've been trying to figure out how to get rid of. Like I'm out somewhere, I'm like at the bar talking to my friend, and suddenly I'm like, that's how I'm gonna fix that. And I have to write it down immediately or I will lose it. And I will, obviously I'll remember this because it's so obvious and clear,
Yeah,
and
it
I'll never get it
happens.
back. You gotta write it down all the time.
Well, so that's interesting that that's your because I used to think like that, and I ended up writing down a lot of junky things, and I figured out that if I don't remember it, it wasn't any good. Well, and
I
you
wish
guys,
my memory was that good.
I don't know that it's good, but a lot of you have already heard this story and probably have heard me tell the story, but Walter John Williams used to wake up in the middle of the night with these amazing dreams of just award-winning, just incredible ideas. And he trained himself to finally, one night he managed to do it. He woke up in the midst of this dream and he wrote down the idea really fast and he went back to sleep. And the next morning he was excited, you know, he like looks at the piece of paper and it says, UFOs are actually made out of bread. You know, and that to me is kind of like, I would write these things down and it'd be like, once I had some distance, it's like, no, that's stupid. It's the thing, if it was not stupid, it would stick around for me. So like everybody's
I wish that
process
was
is
true.
different. Yeah.
So my brain will like sometimes like cough up this absolutely perfect, that's why all of these things have happened, and therefore if I pull them together I can make this other thing happen. And for whatever reason, it will not stick unless I write it down. It's like writing down dreams.
And so you've like written it down and seen, oh yes, this is still a good thing.
Yes.
With the stuff I've written down, it's like, I should not waste ink and paper like this.
And, like, I have to write so fast I can barely read my own handwriting
Yeah.
just to get
Yeah.
it down before it's gone again.
Yeah. And I use the voice app on my phone so that I don't have to write anything down. But often as I find that space between like sleep and awakeness or whatever, where you're sort of lucid, I solve problems. So I can't come up with a new idea. I would probably come up with UFOs or bread. But I can
wouldn't write
solve
that.
a problem in my novel because all the characters and the things are running around in my head and I'm kind of lying there and I'm not quite asleep but I'm not quite awake. And I don't know, they've done studies, I say scientifically, that like when you're tired, like your brain creates like new connections or something. So you might be able to like solve problems that you wouldn't normally be able to solve.
Yep.
So I try to take advantage of that. And if it comes to me, then I'll just, you know, put it in the voice app. And then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then, you know.
I have several more questions, but I'm not going to ask them. Is anybody in the audience have a question?
So talking about that, I got to travel with Jack Williamson for a few years. And from here to Lubbock is a 2-hour drive. And so we're driving over to catch a plane one day. I think we were going to Archon in St. Louis. And Jack was talking, he was near the end of a novel, and he was telling me about how he just couldn't come up with the ending. And we're actually going to Houston. He just was not able to figure out the end of the novel. So we get to Houston, and his thing was we'd get up and we'd go to breakfast and talk to people and stuff, and go for a walk, go to lunch, and then in the afternoon, Jack would lay down for about 2 hours. Because he's in late 80s, early 90s. And so this one afternoon, we have lunch, he goes up to lay down. I come back and get him a couple hours later, and he said, I know how the novel's going to end. His body had to rest,
Yeah.
but his
Yeah.
mind was working. And just that 2 hours came to me. He also, another time, with one of his short stories, he was teaching the creative writing class at the time, and he couldn't get the ending to that. Okay, this is a guy who's in his late 80s, early 90s.
And he was kinda good.
Published for decades.
He was pretty good at, the writing
He was
thing.
teaching a creative writing class where people had to write and turn stuff in. He brings his short story to the class and turns it in and said, I need help with this.
That was very
Got
Jack.
some ideas,
Mm-hmm.
finished it, and won an award with that story.
And got sued by a student. No.
Do you have other questions?
Just to touch on what Jean just shared with us, I've spent much of my visit here this week up in Special Collections, and he did write for a long, long time. I haven't done the analysis, and I probably never will, but for as much as Jack wrote and sold, he also wrote as much or more and didn't sell.
Yeah.
Or didn't finish, but he didn't throw it away. And like some writers, he didn't flip the paper over and use it on another story or as a carbon. Special Collections is full of these Williamson manuscripts that were never sold or never finished, and I'm glad they're there.
Well, and there's one of the genre and literature have a sort of a family feud going on at all times, and one of the difference of opinion is a lot of literary fiction authors would argue that great writers really only write sort of about six books in their whole career, and it takes years and years and years. In genre, you're just writing and writing and writing and writing. Honestly, though, if you look back on the greats, it's like that. They had a bunch of things that never sold, or things that sold that we don't remember because they weren't very good. So I've obviously very much come down on the side of genre, of you're not going to use up all of your good ideas. You're only going to get better at the thing you keep doing and doing and doing.
So I understand you guys all kind of have like this interdisciplinary aspect of living multiple different lives within one lifetime. How does that affect your creative writing process, if it does at all? So like research, or putting yourself maybe in characters, or being able to talk about subjects, knowing that you have that knowledge.
Well, so I'll just say two things. One saying is get a life, not an MFA. No shade on people who get the MFAs.
I got it so I would be more hireable.
Yeah, I mean, but the
That's
idea
the only
being like
reason.
have things to write about. The other thing is a lot of people find out, much to their dismay, they write in their spare time and their scraps of time, and then they are selling enough that they could write full time. They're very dismayed to find they don't actually write a whole lot more than that. Writing exercises a different part of your brain that your day job may not exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You may be going at full capacity even while you're doing something else.
I've done a number of different careers before I became a full-time writer, and I think, I don't know, do they apply? I was going to say, and they all have fed into but it's really kind of not true. I was like a computer programmer. I'm not sure that really helps me do anything. I was a lawyer. Who cares?
But you lived on the res. I mean, you lived.
Oh, yeah, and that's like
things
life
that.
experience, though. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, get a life. I don't know. I'm not going to make a comment about the MFA, but I would say the more experience you have, the more people you've met, the more places you've been, you can draw from all of that. And there are certainly authors who are geniuses out of the box, some. But writing is about, for me at least, it's about the emotional experience. It's about humanity. It's about relationship. So the more that you experience that, I think the more tools are in your toolbox that you can create from, or even questions to ask. Because often, for me, it's I don't really even understand relationship with other people. Not that I'm a psychopath, but I was trying to figure out what does that mean? What does that look like? So that's my way to explore that. Is through fiction, is look at these different kinds of relationships, like sibling relationships, romantic relationships, community, individual. What are all these things that I'm interested in? How can I explore them? And certainly those questions come to me because of the life experience I've had, and because of the things that I've done and the places I've worked and all of that sort of stuff. So it all helps.
I think the most important thing I've learned that has fed into my ability as a writer is to never stop learning, ever.
Yeah.
If you're interested in a thing at all, look it up, find out as much as you possibly can about it. there's no reason you have to actually like go to school for a thing in order to learn that thing. Now that we have the internet, none of us have to spend our time going through interlibrary loan or walking through the card catalog. You can just look things up, and it's magic, and you have all of this information at your fingertips. So why not keep learning? And the more you learn and the more you read, the better you will be as a writer, because you will have that much more in your toolbox.
I don't know that my other life, in my career has helped my writing as much as learning the craft of creative writing has made me much better at my job. In my day job, I'm a scientist, so there's a lot of writing, there's report writing, there's journal article writing, and just communication, not just with people outside my field, but with my peers. And I am a much better communicator than I would be if I had not tried to learn the craft of writing.
And you work with aliens. Sorry,
Well,
he works in Los Alamos. I'm from Los Alamos. You're aliens.
Effectively, yeah. Aliens who are
Radioactive
not
aliens.
good at communicating because scientists are trained, and I include myself in this, we're trained for a certain kind of thinking, but we're not always trained in how to communicate that thinking and what we've learned, even to each other. And I think I'm much better at my job because it sounds weird to say like creative writing, I write these books about robots punching each other, but that actually has made me better at my job because...
At not punching your coworker.
No, not that.
Robots not
I still fail at that, but being able to dissect where an attempt at communication is not working and being able to help people fix that. Because often there's miscommunication where people are talking past each other and they don't even realize it. But when you have spent a lot of time analyzing how to communicate an idea to someone, it's very, very valuable. And so not just outside of science. This would be true, I think, in any job that I had, not just in science. Communication is extremely important in, I think, almost any endeavor. And having an innate understanding of how to make that happen is always very valuable.
Gets you better grants, too.
Yeah, you know what? I suck at writing grant proposals.
I used
That's
to
'cause you
edit
don't-
grant proposals.
You don't
for
recognize that those
years.
are also science fiction.
Well, my dissertation is science fiction. My first published science fiction is my dissertation, for sure.
Anybody else have a question?
Or have we answered all the questions for you?
Every last one. No more questions.
I had a question about, when do you include other people in your process? Like, when do you know, and who do you include?
That's a good
Like, do you
question.
read to your spouse, or you say, my spouse can't go anywhere near this, or you have a good friend, or you just rely on editors or agents?
That's a very good question, and that's something you're gonna have to learn
Yeah.
when to let
Individually.
people see your writing.
And who?
And
Yeah,
who.
and
Yeah.
who,
And how.
right. And what,
Under what
it's
circumstances.
a process, I think, to learn like what to take in and what to discard.
Mhm.
I do not, okay. So the difficult thing, I think, is if you let someone see your writing too soon, they could squash it, and they could be wrong. So they're like, oh, well, this isn't working, or have you, so too much feedback too early is not a good idea. You have to keep the idea precious, you have to nurture it, you have to let it grow a little bit, and then there should be maybe a handful of people you trust that you can show it to, who critique, so we have a critique group. I think most authors find a critique circle that they can work with, people they trust, people who have the right kind of eye for what you're writing. My first critique group was a romance author, a science writer, and a self-help writer. It was a hot mess. That is not the feedback that I needed, for my work. And so they never quite understood what I was doing, and so when they would critique a story or my story, it was no, I'm not gonna so you have to learn also to when someone gives you critique, when is it helpful, when is it not helpful, and that's just a process. But I just babbled a little bit. But someone else say something. It is hard to figure out when to show some of your work and when to not, and who to show it to, and then who to trust.
Well, so the other side of the coin is I started out in a critique, Clarion West is a critique program, and I worked with critique groups for, a couple decades, and my bestsellers were all written without critiquers. To me, it's not actually a particularly valuable. I did extract some value from it, but it definitely did not benefit my ability to make a living as a writer.
I would agree with that. Having done the MFA, largely because I wanted the M after the name, I spent several years in critique groups and learned very little that I didn't already know. But I did learn that that particular critique program is not for me. So that was one piece of information I learned. For me, the first reader is always going to be my wife because, well, for one thing, I trust her implicitly, and for another, she is in many ways a better writer than I am, which means that when she can see things that I don't see, and she can point out things that I have not noticed, and she will also ask me what I want in terms of crit before she gives it to me, which is, I think, kind of crucial for like the early stages. And we read each other's stuff. We're each other's like first reader. She cannot edit my short fiction because most of the edits that she wants me to do are structural, and that makes me like sort of nope out of there, like nope. But she can easily edit my long fiction, and I can edit hers for the same reason. But it's interesting, like after several years of doing this, we figured out what we can and cannot work together on. But yeah, we have a group of friends who are fellow authors that we like run stuff through and talk to about this, but I don't have like a critique group as such.
Just to reiterate what Rebecca said, you have to find, the right time for something, and there are pieces that I'll write, and then within a couple weeks I'll show to people. There are things I've been thinking about for 8 or 9 years before I'm ready to let people see it, because I'm very, I guess you could say, superstitious about things. If the wrong thing is said at the wrong time, it can completely change or destroy something, with no malice. And it's learning how to take in the feedback and, get the things that are helpful and the things that are not helpful.
I think in a way, like writing fanfic and having immediate feedback all the time has been extremely helpful to me, because it allowed me to grow a shell so that I'm not so worried about like a stray word like hitting me in like a place where I will no longer have the courage to work on a piece, because like people on the internet, if they don't like it, okay. But if they do like it, it's really, really helpful and encouraging to get the immediate feedback. Like you post a chapter and like the next day you have like 15 comments going, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, this is perfect.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When they're yelling at you,
it's the
that's
best.
you're on
It's
fire.
like I made them cry. Oh,
Yeah.
But I found that really helps, and it has allowed me to take crit for my original work better, I think.
I think also if you're part of a critique group, you learn how to critique you learn how to critique. And so that is worthwhile as well, because it allows you to learn like what works in a narrative and what doesn't. So it's not so yeah, it's great people give you feedback on your stuff, but you need to learn how to give feedback on other people's stuff, and I think in a critique group that's very helpful. It's made me a better storyteller because I learn like not to impose what I want on them. It's like because the goal of being a critique group is to help that author you're critiquing get to where they want to be, right? Not to write a story like you would write it, because you care, they don't care, you're not you. And often if you're with better writers than you are, I think that can be very helpful too, because then you can see, oh, well, look how they did it. Isn't that way more creative than how I was going to, tackle this idea or, try to fix this or whatever. So you just figure it out for yourself, but there are definite benefits. And they're not all, oh, give me notes on my story. There's other things you get out of that.
And the only thing I'll say, though, is it took me a long time to understand that the stuff that sold was the stuff I wanted to write, not stuff that my critique group liked at all. And I mean, I've sold a lot of books, with stuff that I don't think my former critique groups would have been interested in at all. And so, the moral of that story isn't, oh my gosh, I wasted so much time. And it's never be afraid to say, okay, I tried doing the thing that made sense for a long period of time. It's okay to learn from that and to abandon it and to move on. It really is. You know, don't beat yourself up for wasted time, but also don't lock yourself in because you've invested so much time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm also married to a writer, and we never show each other our work. Part of that is because my wife's a playwright, and I don't come from the theater world, so I can't help her. But I always have that fear of, what if, like, I don't want to dilute her opinion of me, you know? Like,
Anymore.
exactly. Like, it's a slow erosion every day anyway, so that's interesting.
Well, we met each other actually in the comments of a Star Wars fic that I was writing. That's how I met my wife.
That's great.
Seriously.
That's a story.
It
Yeah,
is a
that's
story.
great.
It's completely, it's so, like, I wouldn't actually put it in a story because it's so fictional. But no, it's true. It's like we knew each other sort of on the internet, but we actually fell in love throughout the comments of a fic series that I was writing on AO3. And we basically never stopped writing to each other, ever. Whether we're telling stories or, like, describing our day, we're just constantly, like, talking to each other. I'm aware that I am unusual in this fashion and that I'm incredibly lucky. But that is a thing that I've sort of come to rely on. So.
Well, I think we're out of time, so that was a
Yeah.
great to hear everybody.